The first-class cabin of the flight from Los Angeles to New York was nothing short of luxurious. The smooth hum of the engines was accompanied by the soft chatter of passengers who seemed to belong to another world, one that Alex was certain he had fully entered. The rich scent of gourmet meals wafted through the air, mingling with the smoothness of aged wines and the hushed tones of conversations between business executives, celebrities, and other high-profile individuals. Among them sat Alex, a middle-aged man, whose carefully tailored suit and designer watch screamed success. He had just brokered a multi-million-dollar deal that had cemented his position as a force to be reckoned with in the business world. The kind of success most people dreamed of. He felt the soft leather of his seat, took a sip of scotch, and couldn't help but smile inwardly. He had earned this. He had clawed his way to the top. But as the plane leveled out and the blue sky stretched endlessly before him, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being unfulfilled. He had everything, a successful career, a luxurious life, and the admiration of his peers. Yet, there was something gnawing at him. A feeling that perhaps it wasn't enough. His thoughts were interrupted as he looked around the cabin, catching sight of a familiar figure. There, a few rows ahead of him, sat Clint Eastwood. The legendary actor and director, a man whose career had spanned decades and whose name was synonymous with cinematic greatness, sat casually in his seat. No entourage, no flashbulbs, just a simple man lost in a book. He appeared to be just another passenger on this flight, yet he stood out in a way that Alex couldn't quite place. Alex felt a twinge of jealousy. It wasn't just the fame or the money that Eastwood possessed, it was the way he carried himself. There was an authenticity to Eastwood that Alex didn't understand. He had spent his life constructing his identity, building an empire, making sure every detail of his public persona was meticulously polished. Yet, here was a man who didn't need any of that. Clint Eastwood wasn't a brand, he was simply Clint Eastwood, and the world recognized him for it. The truth hit Alex like a weight in his chest. There was something about Eastwood that Alex lacked. As Alex's eyes continued to scan the cabin, he noticed the flight attendants hovering around Eastwood. They treated him with an obvious reverence, asking him if he needed anything, offering him comfort as though he were royalty. "Mr. Eastwood, would you care for another drink?" one of the attendants asked politely, her voice almost full of awe. Alex scoffed under his breath. What was all the fuss about? Eastwood wasn't doing anything special. He wasn't giving speeches, he wasn't inspiring anyone with his latest project, he was just sitting there, sipping on his water and reading. And yet, there was something about that simplicity, that self-assuredness, that made Alex feel small. What had Eastwood done lately to deserve such reverence? In his mind, Alex convinced himself it was all just the glamour of Hollywood and the nostalgia of old movies that people clung to. Fueled by a sense of resentment and too much scotch, Alex made up his mind. He would go up to Eastwood, challenge him. Show him that fame wasn't everything. Alex believed he could bring Eastwood down from the pedestal he had built in his own mind. It was ridiculous, really, he knew that. But the urge to prove something, anything, was overpowering. With a burst of confidence, Alex stood up from his seat. His legs felt a little unsteady from the alcohol, but he pushed through, his mind locked on his goal. He marched down the aisle, barely noticing the disapproving glances from the passengers as he stumbled. As he reached Eastwood's row, the air seemed to freeze. For a moment, everything went quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. "Hey, Clint!" Alex called out loudly, slurring slightly. He didn't care if the entire cabin heard him. He was determined to make his point. "What's the big deal with you, huh? You're just some old guy making movies for old people. What's your latest hit?" "Oh, wait, I can't even think of one." The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them, and the room was silent. Every eye in the cabin turned toward him. The flight attendants hurried over, but Alex was too far gone. He could see their discomfort, but he didn't care. He was in control now. He felt like he was asserting something, even if it was just a desperate attempt to bring himself back to a level he could feel comfortable with. Eastwood, on the other hand, was unfazed. His eyes lifted slowly from the book in his lap, and for a brief moment, the entire world seemed to pause. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't even defensive. It was simply steady and calm. There was no rush to respond, no need to defend himself. He merely looked at Alex, as though trying to assess him. "Are you done?" Eastwood's voice was calm, low, but it held a weight Alex had never encountered before. Alex's bravado faltered. For the first time, he was aware of how foolish he sounded. His heart began to pound, but he pressed on, unable to stop himself. "I think people like you get too much credit," he muttered. "What have you really done lately?" Eastwood didn't immediately answer. Instead, he closed the book slowly and set it on the armrest. He didn't look at Alex with anger, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Alex feel as if he had just been caught doing something childish and petty. Eastwood's eyes spoke of experience, of a lifetime lived with humility. And yet, Alex couldn't comprehend it. How could this man, a giant in the world of cinema, possess so much quiet dignity? Credit for what? Eastwood finally asked, his voice still calm, but this time there was a slight edge of curiosity in it. Alex opened his mouth but found that the words didn't come. He was suddenly empty of all the justification he had carried with him moments before. What did Eastwood need credit for? The man had already earned everything he could ever need: respect, admiration, a legacy that transcended mere fame. Alex felt small now, more aware of his own insecurities than ever before. He had no answer. Before he could utter another word, the flight attendants intervened. They gently guided Alex back to his seat, his pride in tatters. The murmurs from the other passengers stung as he sat down, and he was acutely aware of their judgment. Eastwood had returned to his book, undisturbed by the altercation. It was as though nothing had happened. Alex, on the other hand, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The remainder of the flight passed in a haze for Alex. He couldn't shake the image of Eastwood's eyes, nor the disapproval of the passengers around him. The confidence that had once been his foundation felt brittle, cracked, and fragile now. He kept his eyes on the ground, hoping no one would speak to him, hoping the rest of the flight would pass quickly. When the plane finally landed in New York, Alex couldn't wait to leave the cabin. He dragged his feet down the aisle, eager to escape the judgment that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. But as he approached the jetway, he froze. There, standing at the exit, was Clint Eastwood. But this time, Eastwood was no longer just a movie star. He was surrounded by military personnel, officers in uniforms that looked sharply pressed. The way they moved around him was different from how the flight attendants had treated him earlier. This was not the reverence of fans or Hollywood elites, this was the respect of men who had seen battle, who understood the weight of true sacrifice. One of the officers handed Eastwood a folder. It wasn't a script or a fan letter. No, this was something else. Alex caught sight of the seal of the U.S. Army on the cover of the folder, official, solemn. It was a commendation, recognizing Eastwood for his ongoing work with wounded veterans. He had been using his fame, his influence, to help those who had given everything. The realization hit Alex like a ton of bricks. Eastwood wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a director. He was a man who had used his life to do something far greater than any movie could ever portray. He had been dedicated to a cause far beyond fame, caring for the wounded, advocating for those who could never repay him. Alex watched as Eastwood briefly turned his gaze in his direction, and for a split second, their eyes met. Eastwood didn't say anything. He didn't have to. There was a quiet understanding between them now. Alex had learned something in that instant, something that would stay with him forever. Eastwood gave a brief nod, turned, and walked away, leaving Alex standing there, humbled and shaken. For the first time, Alex realized that true success wasn't about how much money you made, or how powerful your position was. It was about the legacy you left behind, the lives you touched, the difference you made. As Alex exited the airport, he couldn't help but think of his own life. He had spent so much time focused on building his empire, amassing wealth, and perfecting his image. But he had never considered the lasting impact he could have on others. It was a sobering thought, and as he left the terminal, he felt smaller than he ever had before. He understood now that his journey was just beginning.